Crop Talk on Market Journal is supported by Nebraska's soybean farmers and their checkoff.
Finally today, many producers who want to prevent soil erosion, improve nutrient cycling, sustain their soils, and protect the environment have been adopting the practice of planting cover crops. At this year's Fremont Corn Expo, Extension Educator Katja Koehler was on hand to discuss corn production practices for soil health. This week, Bryce Duskett was joined in studio by Katja to discuss those practices and more.
Let's talk a little bit about Nebraska cover crops. What can you share with us about the number of acres that are put into cover crops each year?
Yeah, so Nebraska sees a steady increase in the number of acres that are planted each year to cover crops. So I think right now we're at about 4% of the cropland that's planted to cover crops. So a lot of that is probably seed corn acres, followed by some soybean and corn acres. Of course, 4% is still a relatively low number. Hopefully we're able to increase that a little bit more with our work in the next few years.
It's an interesting stat sharing that 4% of acres are put into cover crops each year. What are some of the most popular varieties of cover crops that are being planted here in Nebraska?
It's definitely cereal rye, and a lot of farmers are also planting some mixes that almost always include cereal rye as well. So cereal rye, the reason that is probably our most popular cover crop is so well adapted to our cold and dry winters. It's relatively easy to establish and it's relatively easy to kill. So it's a good cover crop for us. It produces the most biomass of the small grain cover crops that we can plant. Other potential cover crops, again, that are mostly going to be in a mix are some brassicas, some legumes such as hairy vetch. Those typically tend to need a little bit longer growing time, so they'd have to be established a little bit earlier in the season. Ideally, we also let them grow a little bit longer just for them to produce enough biomass.
Sure. What are some of the key benefits that corn and soybean producers in particular are seeing the benefits of if they are planting into a cover crop?
If you're planting into a cover crop, if you have a cover crop there in the spring, first of all, your soil is covered.
Yeah.
So erosion is still our main goal with a cover crop. Some other benefits, of course, you are stimulating the soil microbes. You're providing a food source for them, which helps them increase the numbers, helps them reproduce. So more active, more numerous soil microbes will tend to increase nutrient cycling in your soil, improve soil structure. So you have typically one of the first things producers see is better water infiltration, better soil aggregation, and then over time you can increase your soil organic matter.
As we talk today, it's early March, so if producers have a cover crop over winter, perhaps they're thinking about termination as we're gearing up for the upcoming planting season. When's the right time to terminate a cover crop, or I suppose does that depend?
Yeah, it does depend a little bit. So I don't know the exact numbers right now, but we used to recommend terminating cover crop and then waiting about 2 weeks, which I think is still a good recommendation for those folks that are just trying out a cover crop for the first time. Terminate your cover crop and then wait a couple of weeks or so before you plant your corn or soybeans. More and more producers, when they have done cover crops for a few years, tend to move toward planting green. So they will plant their corn or soybean into the standing cover crop and then terminate the cover crop a few days later or at the same time that they're planting.
Methods of termination, have to assume spraying is the most common across Nebraska?
That is the most common, definitely. Cereal rye especially is easily killed with glyphosate, so that's what most people are doing.
Yeah. Well, as we have this conversation, I'm interested to learn about some of the projects that you and perhaps some of your colleagues across the state are working on when it comes to UNL research into cover crops. Are there one or two you want to share with us today?
Yeah, so we have a couple of really interesting projects that are led by colleagues of mine. So one that comes to mind is the highboy interseeding project that is led by my colleague Katie Petarg. She is also with Extension. And this is a collaboration between several entities, among them the Nebraska Department of Energy and the Environment, NDE, as well as the NRDs in the state, and then of course UNL. And so they were able to purchase one of the highboy interseeders with a really wide, I believe it's about 100-foot boom. And so this is the demonstration project mostly where we collaborate with farmers and plant a cover crop in their fields, in certain fields. So with this project, we're planting the cover crop in late August to about early October, either a cereal rye or a mixed cover crop, and then it will be terminated in the spring. And so farmers are actually able to sign up for the project, I believe. So more information can be found on our website on that.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you coming in today. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience?
If you plant a cover crop, or if you're hoping to plant one, now's the time to kind of start planning about that, because one important thing that people tend to forget about is even if you're planting a cover crop in the fall, you're making some decisions now. For example, your herbicide program, you got to make sure that your herbicide program is compatible with the cover crop that you're planting in the fall. So cereal rye, if you're thinking about planting a cereal rye, there's a lot of herbicides that you can choose, but if you're thinking about planting a more diverse mix, especially those that include brassicas, you really have to make sure that the herbicides that you're applying this spring and summer are not negatively impacting your cover crop that you will plant in the fall.